Okay, well, welcome everybody to this wonderful Saturday morning. We're going to do a green energy series on thermal energy storage today. This webinar is part of Solar Oregon. Solar Oregon is a Oregon nonprofit that is focused on education, outreach, community, and advocacy work. We do a lot of work helping people go solar, and increasingly now it's go solar with storage. Some of the events we host are solar tours. Later this year, we will have a solar tour that is scheduled. Stay tuned for emails and advertisement about that event. We also do solarized campaigns and peer-to-peer education. Solar Oregon operates on quite a small budget. We have 2 paid staff. The rest of us are volunteers, but you can support our work with this link. And feel free to use the Q&A features of Zoom to ask questions. And my name is Edward Louie, and in my day job, I work at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory as a building energy efficiency research engineer. Outside of work, I shoot archery, I ride bicycles, I do a lot of cooking, and I'm also working on building off-grid zero energy tiny house. That was featured on 2 years ago at the Go Zero Energy Tour. And disclaimer, the views in this presentation do not necessarily represent the position of Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, U.S. Department of Energy, or Solar Oregon. I've made best effort to convey facts and information accurately. However, you're encouraged to do your own research and your own calculations before making any investment decisions. Okay, so now to the meat of this month's presentation on thermal energy storage. We'll begin by looking at and recapping some information about why we need thermal energy storage. And then we're going to compare thermal energy storage versus batteries and look at thermal energy storage versus ground source heat pumps. That should say, let's correct that while we're at it. Ground source heat pumps. Okay, back to the slideshows. All right, and then we'll look at different timescales for how long that thermal energy storage needs to last. We'll take a look at building insulation levels and how that affects thermal energy storage sizing. And we'll do a brief offshoot to looking at the thermodynamics of latent heat versus sensible heat and why it matters. And then we'll look at current products and technologies on the market, as well as then move on to future configurations that are theoretically possible. We'll look at current controls and then the future of thermal energy storage. So to start off, the main question is, why do we need thermal energy storage? Well, the reason why we need it is because in the winter, the vast majority of energy loads are predominantly thermal. Oftentimes, when you look at a pie chart for a breakdown of how a home uses energy, you end up seeing a pie chart for annual energy usage. And so there's a pie chart for space heating and a pie chart for space cooling, and so on and so forth. But that's annual. If you look at a month-by-month pie chart, then what you'll find is that for the month of November, December, January, and February, the percent of that pie chart that is space heating is 50% or more, and which means that we can take care of this big 50% of the pie chart with the help of thermal energy storage. Another reason why we need thermal energy storage is because when we want the most heating and when our buildings use the most energy, happens to be at the same time when solar energy availability is the lowest. So we typically use the most energy in our homes in January and December, and those are the same months when solar generation is the lowest. And so then, therefore, we need to capture energy from the solar panels whenever it is available and store in our batteries and store in our thermal energy storage, so that then during the hours and days when it is not sunny or it's very cold, we can then conservatively use energy from the thermal energy storage and use energy from our batteries, and so that we're not having to tap into the grid for that energy. And so it's how do we really manage energy in the months of November, December, January, and February. That is the challenge. In the middle of the months, in spring and fall and summer, when there is plenty of solar energy available, we can be sloppy. We don't need to necessarily store it. We can be wasteful, and it will still be okay. But those critical months in the dead winter is when we really need to manage energy usage through thermal energy storage and battery energy storage. And so one of the ways that we want to compare thermal energy storage with battery energy storage is from a few metrics. One is price. How does the price compare between batteries and thermal energy storage? Well, in the world of thermal energy storage, there are not that many products available that have a price tag that is knowable. One is because thermal energy storage is relatively not as available as a technology compared to batteries. Batteries, there are hundreds of different batteries to choose from. Some of the more popular ones are shown here. Tesla Powerwall. It's about $8,000 for 13.5 kilowatt hour of battery storage. In a previous Green Energy series, I spoke about how AC coupled batteries tend to cost more than DC coupled batteries. And that's what we're seeing here again. Tesla Powerwall 2 is an AC coupled battery, and this EG4 Power Pro is a DC coupled battery. And there's a dramatic price difference between the two for being the same size battery, pretty much. One is half the cost of the other. So cost is a factor. Now, thermal energy storage is, for the most part, coming in price competitive with the best price batteries available. So typically, thermal energy storage will cost less than batteries in today's technology for batteries. And then the other thing we want to think about is weight, specifically shipping weight, or the weight that you need to carry the device into your house in order to set it up. That's a big deal. Batteries are not lightweight. They're fairly heavy, but some thermal energy storage devices are also really heavy too. We're talking about weights that you need specialized equipment, like a motorized dolly that can help carry this stuff in. Generally, you don't want humans carrying 250 pounds or 500 pounds. It's not safe. But in the thermal energy storage world, there is the possibility of some thermal energy storage devices that can be shipped empty and be filled on site. And that is really interesting because that really reduces the cost of shipping by being lighter weight. And then by being lighter weight, it's also easier for humans to carry that product into the home and to set it up. And then afterwards, then fill it with the solution, in this case, water. And then therefore, it's easy to set up in terms of a weight issue. And then the other thing to think about is cycle life and cycle degradation. So you might be familiar with the fact that battery storage has a finite number of cycles. In the world of vehicles, batteries, and home batteries, we're talking thousands and thousands of cycles. Typically, they rate the batteries at 8,000 cycles for its design life, and that's roughly around 15 to 20 years. So it's quite a long time. The batteries in your cell phone typically last a lot fewer cycles because they get cooked by the heat from the screen and the processor, and those batteries are far less thermally managed than the batteries that are in cars and that are going into homes. And that's why one of the contributing factors to the difference in battery lifespan. But thermal energy storage is very different. The materials used in thermal energy storage typically have an infinite life cycle. They don't degrade. And then also from cycle to cycle, they do not degrade in their thermal storage capacity. So when it's brand new, if it can hold 14 kilowatt hours, 10 or 20 years later, you'll still be able to get 14 kilowatt hours of thermal energy storage out of that device. The same cannot be said with batteries. And so these are some kind of interesting differences between thermal energy storage and battery storage. Now, when we think thermal energy storage, another kind of common thought process is, well, why can't we use the dirt in your backyard as the thermal energy storage media? Why do we need an actual device that we have to bring into the home to do that? Well, one is the cost of these thermal energy storage devices is in the order of like $1,000 to $8,000 for it to couple to an air source heat pump. A ground source heat pump is much more expensive. They cost between $25,000 to $30,000 to do a ground source heat pump. $30,000 being the vertical borehole style, and then $25,000 being the slinky horizontal style heat exchanger. But much more of an issue than cost is the issue of physical feasibility. Ground source heat pumps need a lot of space. We're talking 1,500 to 3,000 square feet of land for a horizontal ground loop, and that's per ton of heating or cooling. So a typical home needs 3 tons of heating. So you do the math, let's just pick the middle number, 2 times 3 is 6,000 square feet. That's more land area than most people's whole property. And so this is just backyard space. So you have to live in a pretty rural area with like farm level of density in order to allow this to be feasible. If you're in the middle of a suburban city, it's unlikely you're going to have a backyard big enough for a horizontal slinky loop style ground source heat pump. Now, it may be possible to do a vertical borehole style ground source heat pump, but even that can be tricky because the number of boreholes you need and then how far the boreholes need to be spaced apart, it's still a non-trivial amount of space, and you might not have enough backyard to do that either. And so these physical constraints may make ground source heat pumps just infeasible for folks living in urban and suburban properties, and in which case then we're back to needing a thermal energy storage device that's connected to an air source heat pump as a more valuable solution. So the other thing that we want to think about when it comes to thermal energy storage is the duration in which we want the thermal energy storage to last. They're typically divided into 3 categories. One is sub-hourly, so less than 1 hour of thermal energy storage before that device is exhausted. And it may not sound like much. Okay, well, why would I ever want to buy a thermal energy storage device that only lasts 15 minutes or half an hour before it's exhausted? That doesn't sound very useful. Well, it is useful because in the wintertime, heat pumps go into defrost. And during that defrost period, you have 2 choices. You either go with no space heating during that period of defrost, or the outdoor unit of the heat pump will turn on electric resistance backup heat in the air handler, which uses a lot of electricity. And then that electric resistance backup heat will supply your space heating needs during that 15-minute period of defrost, and then also provide that additional heat to help defrost the outdoor units. Well, neither of those are really great options, going without heat or having a really high power bill. So if you have a thermal energy storage device that can span that 15-minute period, and that's great. You can continue to get space heating, and then the outdoor unit can tap also into that thermal energy storage device for heat in order to defrost the outdoor unit. And then when it is done defrosting, then the system go back to normal and recharge your thermal energy storage device for the next defrost period, and then as well as supply heat to space heating. And so sub-hourly, there is a utility for sub-hourly thermal energy storage devices. Now, hourly thermal energy storage devices are quite useful because the way that the grid works is in the wintertime, there is typically an AM peak and a PM peak. So in the wintertime, most grids now, or especially project into the future as we electrify more cities and more homes, we will increasingly have an AM and a PM peak in the wintertime. And the reason is because when people get up, they want to take showers, they want to warm up their house, and then also businesses go from, a unoccupied building control state to an occupied building control state, and that typically means using a bunch of heat and energy to warm up the building in anticipation of staff coming into the building. So then there's an AM peak associated with, those energy needs, and then the same happens in the late afternoon. When people leave their place of work and go home and again cook, shower. Meanwhile, also businesses have yet to switch over from occupied building state to unoccupied. So those businesses are still using a lot of energy. And so you have a PM peak. Another reason for and then in the wintertime, typically that AM peak will be bigger than the PM peak because in the morning, the outdoor air has had all night long to cool off. And so it's usually the coldest in the morning and colder in the morning than the afternoon. In the afternoon, it's had all day to warm up the outdoor air. And so by the evening, it's still kind of warm. And with air source heat pumps, how efficient that heat pump is depends on how cold the outdoor air is. And so the colder the outdoor air, the worse it performs. And this efficiency of performance is commonly referred to as a coefficient of performance. And so in the morning period, heat pumps are typically the most inefficient. And so having access to a thermal energy storage device that can provide supplemental heat so that the heat pump doesn't need to work as hard in the morning, that would help improve its coefficient of performance. And then in very cold days, heat pumps also lose heating capacity as it gets colder. And that's unfortunate because when it gets colder, a building's heating load increases. And so as it gets colder, we really want that heating capacity to be maintained, if not improved. And so in cold weather, a thermal energy storage device that's charged up can help a heat pump maintain heating capacity during really cold outdoor temperatures. In the summertime, typically there's only an afternoon peak, and that's because on a hot summer day, it typically gets the hottest. The hottest in the day is around 5, 6, 7 p.m., around that period. And that's the period when people go home, they want to cool down their home, and at the same time, businesses have yet to go from a occupied to an unoccupied building state. And so both residential and commercial customers are cranking their air conditioning. And so that leads to a very high electric grid peak. During the time that it's really hot outside, the heat pumps in cooling mode also struggle to reject the heat from the indoor environment to the outdoor. So as a result, the coefficient of performance is quite poor. And on really, really hot summer days, you lose cooling capacity, because again, the heat pump is struggling to reject heat to the outdoor air, and when it's not able to reject as much heat to outdoor air as it was designed, then you lose cooling capacity. And so thermal energy storage that is pre-cooled before this period can improve a heat pump's efficiency, or improve its COP, and then also improve its cooling capacity during those hours. And then thermal energy storage that is capable of spanning 24 hours or 48 hours would be considered a thermal energy storage that is can operate in the scale of days or daily periods. And this is really useful for situations where the heat pump is trying to get through a winter storm, where you have multiple days of extremely cold weather. And so a thermal energy storage in this situation would really help a heat pump reduce the number of hours in which it needs to run auxiliary heat, and improve the coefficient of performance of the heat pump in these extreme cold days. So we talked about, different scales of thermal energy storage. And one of the things actually I want to mention in these different scales is that different technologies for thermal energy storage may be best fit for these different durations of thermal energy storage. You may not want to use the same technology or the same product to do all three. Now, whichever thermal energy storage technology is selected, how long it will last depends on the heating or cooling demands of the building. And that is in many ways affected by how well insulated the building is. A poorly insulated building needs more heat and more cooling. And so as a result, then a thermal energy storage device or a battery energy storage device of a fixed size will last not as long in a home that is poorly insulated. And one of the good analogies to how well insulated a home is you can look at different coolers, and certain brands of coolers have much thicker insulation and much better seals to keep warm air from entering the cooler. And those really nice coolers keep ice for much longer than coolers with thinner insulation and worse air sealing. Buildings and homes are no different. And this is a graph that is from Rocky Mountain Institute. They did simulated power outages for a home to look at how different insulating levels of homes will cool off when you stop heating the home due to a power outage. And in this graph, a passive house will last, as you can see in the green line, last much longer. It takes many more hours for it to cool off to 60 degrees, and it takes many more hours before it cools off to 50 degrees. Whereas a home that is with 1950s levels of insulation will cool off much quicker, and then to 60 degrees, and much quicker to 50 degrees, and so on and so forth. And we're talking about when outdoor, this gray line here is the simulated outdoor temperatures. So it may not get nearly this cold in Portland or in the Portland metro area ever. Perhaps very few places in Oregon and Washington ever gets that cold. But even if you were to increase these outdoor temperatures by 10 or 20 degrees, these curves will still kind of hold the same shape. So one of the kind of really economical ways to reduce the size of the battery and thermal energy storage needed to keep the house warm is to improve the insulation levels of the home. Or you can look at it another way. For the same size battery and thermal energy storage, you can go through a much longer periods, durations for the same size. And we also want to look at the concept of latent versus sensible heat. So latent heat is the heat it takes to get a substance to change phase. So for example, with water, the latent heat of fusion is the heat it takes to convert ice from water from a liquid to a solid ice, or from solid ice back to liquid water. So what happens is, if you were to cool liquid water down to 32 degrees, you still need to, once you hit 32 degrees in terms of sensible heat, you need to continue to remove 144 BTUs per pound of water before that liquid water will change to ice. And so that's a lot of heat that you need to remove. Whereas water's sensible heat is quite a bit less. You need 1 BTU per pound Fahrenheit in order to raise or lower water by 1 Fahrenheit. And so we can utilize the latent heat of a substance in thermal energy storage. Other materials have different temperatures of phase change. And depending on certain mixtures, you can adjust the temperature at which a substance changes phase. With water, adding salt, for example, will lower the freezing point. For other materials, adding certain substances will increase or decrease its phase change temperature. And then it can also change the amount of latent heat it takes to change that substance from a liquid to a solid phase. And so for water, because the latent heat of water is so much bigger than the sensible heat, if you were to use just the sensible heat of water in a thermal energy storage device, that device will need to be much bigger. And so for a reasonably sized water-based thermal energy storage system that uses sensible heat, it would be of a size that it would be too big to fit into a home. It would utilize your whole entire basement's space. And so if you want it to be a reasonable size, you would want it to be a device that uses latent heat in order to get more hours to get a thermal energy storage duration in the order of hours of days. But if you want to just use a thermal energy storage device that lasts 15 minutes for like a defrost, for example, then using the sensible heat of water alone is still acceptable. Now, there are only a few thermal energy storage products on the market. Many more are public and announced, but they're not yet sold. The ones that are announced but not yet sold, there's not a lot of information about the products in terms of what sizes that they're going to sell it in, what the pricing will be, etc. But here's a list of some that are available. SunAmp and IceBear are 2 products that have been commercially available for quite some time. SunAmp uses a material called sodium acetate trihydrate. It sounds like a mouthful. It sounds complicated, but really this is just liquid salt. And they use sodium acetate trihydrate, which is liquid salt. They spray it onto potato chips to make them salty. They don't sprinkle like granular salt onto potato chips. They spray it on. So it's safe to eat, and it's abundant on the planet. In high concentrations, it will phase change, and so this material changes phase at least the mixture that SunAmp uses. It changes phase at 130 Fahrenheit from liquid to solids and back to liquid, and this product is intended to be for heat, to help with heating only, and it connects with systems via a hydronic system. So it connects with domestic hot water tanks, panel radiators, and radiant floor systems. And it's available today. Another product is called IceBear. And this one uses water. But the way that they sell it is it's sold packaged with an air conditioner, and so it's a vat of water with a refrigerant to water heat exchanger attached to an air conditioner. And so how it works is that during certain hours, like overnight when electricity is cheap, it will make ice. And then during the hours of, like, for example, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. when it's still really hot and you want to improve your air conditioning's efficiency, it will switch to rejecting heat from the indoor air to this box of ice to melt the ice. And this product has been commercially available, and it's been quite well sold in Southern California and Phoenix, Arizona areas. In particular, the commercial world, a lot of Amazon warehouses and stuff, that type of building have purchased these for their rooftop air conditioners. And this, by using ice, improves the air conditioning efficiency and performance during the hot afternoons. But the company does not make this product for heating purposes. It's only for cooling. And then there are some other products that are announced. Net Energy is a graphite wax phase change material. They don't really give much more detail than that. So magic. But they're also marketing it as a device to help improve air conditioning efficiency performances. And they have not made any announcements to market it for heating. So like the Ice Bear, it's a cooling only product. Neothermal is an interesting product. It does not use the heat pump to charge up the device. It uses electric resistance to charge up the device. And they use a material, also sodium acetate trihydrate, so a similar material as SunAmp, but maybe they've blended it differently because they have a patent for their version of sodium acetate trihydrate. But it's also a phase change material. They may adjust it so that instead of phase changing at 130 Fahrenheit, it changes phase at like 150 Fahrenheit by adjusting the mixture. And so this thermal energy storage device distributes the heat using glycol loop, a pump, and heat exchangers to the air handler and domestic hot water system. And again, it's this thermal energy storage is to help with during the heating season and not for air conditioning. Aris Hydronic and Taco System M are two different brands that make a system that utilizes air to water heat pumps connected to buffer tanks. And these are tanks that store water, and the buffer tanks can be made to store heated water or chilled water. And so this thermal energy storage device, being the water tank, stores heat in terms of utilizes the sensible heat of water to store energy. So it doesn't store a lot of energy. Like I said, it's probably good for 20 or 30 minutes of thermal energy storage at best. But this product can do heating and cooling, or the thermal energy storage device can help with heating and cooling. Harvest Thermal is another product that is on the market or beta available, and it uses a SAN CO2 heat pump. So therefore, SAN CO2 is a CO2 based heat pump. CO2 is not really that great for cooling, but it's really good for heating. And so that heat pump really only has a heating mode, not a cooling mode. And so they connect the SAN CO2 heat pump with buffer tanks and a control box that can send the water a few different ways. And so the buffer tanks, again, store the heat using the sensible heat capacity of water. And so again, that means for a reasonable sized tank of like 80 gallons to 100 gallons, you're talking about 15 to 30, maybe 40 minutes of thermal energy storage before it runs out. And it can then send that heat to domestic hot water tanks or to fan coil units for space heating. And so some details about these products. So we've kind of done an overview of the products, and so some details and some pictures of what these products look like. The SunAmp is a product that has a coil where you can send hot glycol. Typically, it's glycol because it connects to an air-to-water heat pump, and there's a heat exchanger in an air-to-water heat pump that's located outside. And so you don't want pure water in running through that heat pump, because if it freezes, then, well, water freezes and it expands, and so then that heat exchanger in the outdoor unit will crack, and there will be major problems. And so typically it's air to glycol mixed with water for that loop that goes to the outside. And so that water glycol mix comes in after it's been heated with the air to water heat pump, and it goes through into the SunAmp thermal energy storage battery. And so when you heat this the salt sodium acetate mixture up above 130 Fahrenheit, it changes phase from a solid to a liquid, and then it's fairly well insulated. So then later in when you want to use that heat for domestic hot water or use that heat for space heating, then you would then draw that heat out using the same glycol loop, and then cool down this sodium acetate material down from, let's say they heat it from 130 up to 140, then it cools down from 140 back down to 130. But as you keep pulling heat out of it, you need to pull a lot of heat out of this material before it changes phase from a liquid back to a solid. And so therefore, one of the pros is that because we're using the latent heat of this sodium acetate material and utilizing a phase change, it's fairly energy dense. But some of the cons of this product is, well, it has to ship with this sodium acetate trihydrate material. So each of these white boxes in this picture here of a field installation is 500 pounds. So two of them side by side was 1,000. You need to have a floor that can support 1,000 pounds in a small area. So it takes some careful planning to do that. Same thing, it's with the phase change at 130 degrees Fahrenheit, it's not good for cooling. It's comparatively high cost. It's still low cost compared to battery storage, or cost competitive with the best battery storage out there, the most economical battery storage out there. But, you know, compared to water, it's still an expensive thermal energy storage material. And in order to utilize this thermal storage, you have to have multiple heat exchangers. At the outdoor unit, you need to have a refrigerant to glycol water heat exchanger. Then inside here, there's a glycol to this phase change material heat exchanger. And then you need to use pump energy. And then there's also more heat exchangers, like a heat exchanger at the domestic hot water tank, a heat exchanger at the air handler, in order to tap into this thermal storage. So that's the SunAmp. Ice Bear is, again, one that's only used for cooling. So here's, in this picture, is the ice box. It ships empty. It's got a refrigerant to water heat exchanger in the ice box. On the other side of this picture is the air conditioning unit. So they ship it with the air conditioning unit paired with the ice box. The nice thing is that this thing ships empty. And then once you get it in place, then you fill it with a garden hose with water. And so it's lighter in weight shipped than pretty much any of the other products that I'll show you. And because it's water from a garden hose, it's very low cost thermal storage material. And it does utilize the phase change of water, so then it is energy dense. But while it is theoretically possible to use the phase change of water into ice and ice back into liquid water for heating, this company does not make a product that does that, and no such commercially available product exists on the market, and it's currently for cooling only. Net Energy is a announced product that there's no I've not physically seen one, and they are certainly not selling them to the consumer. But this one utilizes a graphite wax material, and it is refrigerant directly to that material. So similar to the Ice Bear, refrigerant directly to the to the thermal energy storage material. So you're not utilizing that glycol loop. So that saves you some heat exchangers. But because it ships instead of water, it's using that graphite wax material. So this blob here, this box, could be really heavy. I mean, it might be up to like, close to like a dumbbell in weight density. Nobody knows what the cost is, but I imagine it would be in the order of the higher cost thermal energy storage material. There is a phase change, and one of the advantages is that because it has refrigerant pipes running through the system, then we're minimizing number of heat exchangers. Okay, and then Neotherm. Neotherm is, of all the announced or thermal energy storage products on the list, one that is perhaps the most interesting. It is the only one on the list that heats the thermal energy storage material using electric resistance. So it's not very efficient, but because heating with electric resistance, you get a coefficient of performance of 1 at best, versus all the other ones are charging the thermal energy storage material using a heat pump. But the advantage of this is that they're able to get that thermal energy storage material much hotter than what a heat pump can normally do. So they're targeting temperatures like 180 Fahrenheit. And that's kind of interesting because then as pictured in this picture, you have your normal air handler that it has a certain capacity. So let's say it's a 3-ton air handler. So you're only going to get at best 3 tons of heat. But then on the very, very super cold day of winter, your home, because of the increased heat loss, might need 4 or 5 tons of heat in order to stay warm. And you can't get blood out of a stone. Same thing, you can't get more BTUs out of a 3-ton heat pump than its rated capacity. And so how do you get those extra, BTUs to keep your house warm? Well, the Neothermal, what they're proposing is instead of modifying or messing with the existing air handler and the heat exchanger in the air handler, they're proposing a system that is a additional heat exchanger that goes on top of your air handler. And so then this, when it's discharging 150 or 180 degree glycol out of the thermal energy storage battery, that can add the additional ton or 2 tons of heat that you need for your home. Same thing, how it helps with domestic hot water. There's a glycol to water heat exchanger, and when it circulates, the 150 or 180 degree glycol from the thermal energy storage battery to domestic hot water, that is a high enough temperature that it can help with heating the domestic hot water. So that's the Neothermal. This Neothermal, again, uses a phase change material that it has to ship with. So it could be quite heavy and difficult to get into the home. Aris Hydronic. Aris Hydronic is actually a company based here in Oregon. Their home is in Milwaukee, Oregon. I've met the CEO of this company, seen the product. And then another one that is very similar to Aris Hydronic is TACO's System M. All these products utilize a air-to-water heat pump. And then, so then this air-to-water heat pump can make hot water or chilled water. And so how these systems work is they have water tanks that typically have a internal heat exchanger. So then it can be charged with this air-to-water heat pump to make hot water or chilled water in the tank. And that water is then sensible storage of thermal energy. And that allows the fan coil units or domestic hot water heating to be decoupled from outdoor compressor energy usage. So the idea is that you can help with the defrost, so that when the outdoor unit is out of commission because it's defrosting, you can still get space heating, no problem, because the space heating will draw heat from that buffer tank. And then also when there's a period where there's like a super peak in the grid, and so then the utility needs to shed energy for a 5-minute period or 10-minute period. These short periods of energy demand response does happen. They don't always need hours of energy savings. Sometimes they only need 5 minutes of energy savings. Then that buffer tank can also maintain space heating while the outdoor compressor shuts off. This system has very simple controls and uses technology that's pretty mature compared to some of the other ones shown. But sensible heat is a low density thermal energy storage media, so you're not really likely to get hours or days of thermal energy storage ever unless you have a humongous tank. And there's a lot of heat exchangers that need to get involved with making these systems work, and so there's heat exchanger efficiency losses. Harvest Thermal is a California-based company, I'm pretty sure, and they make a pod. It's a box with pumps, solenoids that control the position of valves, and temperature sensors, and like a control board. And so they don't make all the other parts. The idea is that a installer will buy a sand CO2 heat pump and some water tanks that have internally heat exchangers to act as buffer tanks, and they'll buy the Harvest Thermal pod and put it all together. And you end up with a system very similar to the one pictured here, with the outdoor units and buffer tanks and domestic hot water tanks that are plumbed together. But because they use the sand CO2 heat pump, the heat pump has the advantage of using CO2, which is a zero global warming potential refrigerant, but the sand CO2 is only a heating only heat pump. It does not do cooling. And so therefore the Harvest Thermal system is a heating only system and does not offer an air conditioning mode, unlike these two, which do have a cooling mode. And so those are kind of the systems that are either announced or beta commercially available or commercially available. Here are some systems that are not commercially available or are not announced, but the thermodynamics makes it so that they are theoretically possible, and they're even more theoretically possible because heat pumps that can do simultaneous heating and cooling exist on the market. And so therefore, you can draw that heat from your in-ground swimming pool or a rainwater collection tank that's buried underground. And this water that is protected from the outdoor air will probably, even in the wintertime, be 45 degrees. And so, and they're really large bodies of water. Like an typical in-ground swimming pool, it has 10,000 gallons of water. A typical rainwater collection tank is 5,000 gallons. And so 5 or 10,000 gallons, while the sensible thermal energy density of liquid water is not high. Like I said, 1 Fahrenheit per pound of water to change it by 1 degree. But since you have 5 or 10,000 gallons, hey, that can still last you hours or if not days of heat, and that's really cool, because typically people will not install an in-ground pool or rainwater collection tank just for thermal energy storage. No, you install a swimming pool because you want to enjoy having a swim in your backyard, and you install a rainwater collection tank because you want to collect rainwater for use later, and to manage on-site stormwater to keep it from flooding your backyard or flooding your neighbor's yard. And so those are the primary reasons why these things are installed. But with a heat pump that can do simultaneous heating and cooling, then you can utilize these existing infrastructure to help with space heating in the wintertime, and then also help with space cooling in the summertime. And then with a heat pump that can do simultaneous heating and cooling, theoretically, you can also extract heat from 45-degree water from this refrigerant to water icebox, and extract heat until it gets to 32, keep extracting heat until it changes phase. And so that is also theoretically possible. But the heat pump manufacturers that make a simultaneous heating and cooling heat pump right now, they do not make the controls to be able to do this, and it's not a application of their heat pump that is at all endorsed or sanctioned or supported by those heat pumps. And so these are currently in the theoretical space. And current controls of heat pumps integrated with thermal storage are all kind of basic controls. They either turn on and off a circulation pump, they switch valves to different configurations, they tell the outdoor unit to turn on or off, and they tell the outdoor units to either switch to cooling mode or heating mode. So not advanced controls by any stretch of the imagination, and therefore, if we really want the thermal energy storage to really make an impact in the world, we will need better controls, such as intelligent controls that can modulate how quickly or quickly the charge or discharge thermal energy storage device, and intelligence to decide whether to charge the thermal energy storage or not, because like in a mild day when it's only a little bit cold or a little bit hot outside, it may not be worth it to charge up a thermal energy storage device, because the heat pump can maintain pretty good coefficients of performance without the aid of a thermal energy storage device to help. And so some of this intelligence will require some additional data. So like we need hourly forecast data to be factored into the control. We need hourly forecasted solar irradiance. So like how sunny will it be today at 2 o'clock, or how sunny will it be at 5 o'clock? We need that information to be factored in. If there's time of use rates, here's a picture of Portland General Electric's optional time of use rates. As you can see, they're in the May through October. There is a summer peak, and so it's a PM peak that begins at 3 p.m. and goes until 8 p.m. In the wintertime, November 1st through April 30th, there's a dual peak, one in the morning from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., and then an afternoon peak from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. So kind of alluding to the previous slide of AM peak in a PM peak in the summer, and an AM and a PM peak in the wintertime. And then the future of thermal energy storage also will likely involve these theoretical systems that I showed in the previous slide becoming available to consumers. And so the conclusions for thermal energy storage is that it really is a wonderful complement to battery energy storage, because the majority of winter energy loads are thermal. Thermal energy storage can reduce the battery size needed in a home. And if thermal loads are about 50% of the energy pie in winter, then theoretically you need about half the size of the battery needed in a home, which is great. Thermal energy storage has infinite cycle life with no lifetime degradation, which is better than batteries. And thermal energy storage can use materials that are abundant, inexpensive, and ecologically friendly to extract compared to battery storage technologies we have currently on the market. And likely we will see heat pump manufacturers produce products with tighter integration of thermal energy storage in the future, with better controls, and that these advanced controls will definitely be needing the heat pump manufacturers to take the lead because of the need for that tight integration with thermal energy storage with their products. And so with that, that's the conclusion of this presentation. I'll give a plug for next month's Green Energy Series. The date and time are still to be determined, and the reason why is because it will either be a webinar or recorded in-person presentation as part of Sustainable Buildings Week. And the topic right now is that it's going to be a case study of first cost of electrification versus the ongoing electric bills. It'll be a case study of my house as I changed out, appliances to electrify. So I'll give a run through of how much it cost for, like, for example, installing the induction range. How much did that cost, and how much did that save me in terms of utility bills? And so that will be that presentation next month. And with that, we've got some time for questions, and looks like there are some questions. All righty. No, they're just comments.
Yeah, that was a great talk, Edward. Thanks. I don't see any questions, but if anybody wants to either put one in the Q&A or in the chat. And the recording of this will be posted and sent by email to everyone who registered. So you can watch that on the Solar Oregon YouTube channel later if you want to catch up with any of the details.
Oh,
okay.
Let's see.
Oh, there's one.
Are you contemplating using one of these in your house? No, I am currently waiting for the ones that are theoretically possible. In fact, in my day job at work, I'm trying to get such a system tested in a lab home, so a home that no one occupies and has to deal with the consequences of it not working. And then once it works well in the lab home, then I'll consider a prototype after it works in the lab home in my home. Okay, I think any other questions? Oh, there isn't a question. Some water-only heat storage projects have been done in Alaska years ago. Any idea how they are performing today? Yes. So I'm familiar with those projects. Some of the more famous ones are done by the Cold Climate Research Center in, I believe it's Fairbanks, or is it Anchorage, Alaska? But anyways, the Cold Climate Research Center is a actual research center that is partially funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, and they have a test house where they buried nearly a 12,000 gallon hot dog style water tank that they then spray foam with closed cell spray foam so that it's well insulated. And then they buried that thing to see how well thermal storage will work for the home. And one of the kind of downfalls of that system is that when they charge that 11,000 gallon water tank, they needed to charge it to temperatures like 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 120 degrees Fahrenheit in order to then have usable heat in the wintertime. Well, as you imagine, if you, even with an insulated tank, if the inside liquid is 100 Fahrenheit and the outdoor soil temperature is 35, maybe, I don't know, maybe even below freezing, then that's a lot of heat loss through the insulation because of the large temperature difference. So what they found is, yeah, it works, but we lose a lot of heat to the environment, and so its round trip efficiency is quite poor. Whereas in the world of extracting heat out of 45-degree water, then the temperature difference between the water and the surrounding environment is much less, and so heat loss should be much smaller. But this system does require the heat pump to be operating in order for you to get heat. It's not a free ride where you just operate a circulation pump. It does require the compressor to run, but a heat pump, a modern heat pumps can easily extract heat from 45-degree sources and make 120 or even 130 or 140 degree refrigerant to supply to space heating and domestic hot water heating. So that's very easy to do because a lot of heat pumps can work down to 5 Fahrenheit or negative Fahrenheit outdoor air temperatures and still extract heat from those sources. And so then the refrigerant needs to get to, minus 25, minus 30 Fahrenheit in order to do proper heat exchange with outdoor air that's 0 Fahrenheit. And so, of course, that takes a lot of energy to make a refrigerant that cold. And you need to run the outdoor fan and the outdoor unit at really high speeds in order to move enough air to extract heat out of such cold outdoor air. And so intuitively, a system like this would be much more efficient because it would be a lot easier to extract heat out of, 45, 40 degree or 38 degree source. So that is the story there.
All right, pretty much right on time, 11:02. Thank you so much, Edward. That was awesome again, and we'll get the recording sent out early next week. Thanks, everybody.
All right, super. Thanks, everybody, for coming. All right, take care.